Today we're going to look at moving beyond the tool of Google Classroom and taking Classroom further into our actual classroom pedagogy. This video and presentation assumes that you have already watched parts 1 and 2, Google Beginners and Google Classroom Advanced, and that you basically know all of the features and how to use them within the software. We're going to start by taking a look at pedagogy. First of all, what is pedagogy? Well, you can read for yourself, so I won't read the definition to you, but basically it's everything that goes into teaching. It's all parts of teaching. It's what we do with the students. It's how we teach the students. It's how we assess the students. It's all the parts of what makes a good teacher. So we want to take a look today at those parts and how we can become better teachers. Basically, pedagogy has a lot of choices involved in it. It's very, very complex. And a few of these are here. For example, are we doing outcome-based learning or interest-based? Are we on a 20% time project? And what they're doing, what the students are doing, is based around their interests? Or are we focusing on the outcomes and the curriculum? Are we assessing in a formative fashion or a summative fashion? All of these things listed on this slide, it's all a part of how you decide what's best for your students. So, how do we use tech to engage our students? Well, we can look at a few things, and we need to ask ourselves a few questions when we are using technology in our classroom. Questions like, are you putting the tech in there just for the sake of using tech? Or is it the right tool for the job? Will it empower the kids? Is it going to let them do something they've never done before? What's your goal? What's the content you're wanting to teach? Sometimes you have to teach the tool, and that's okay. As long as you're not just teaching the tool, you plan on taking it further with content. Does this tool that you're using, whatever it may be, does it promote the students' learning? Does it help them be creative, be curious, move beyond what you are telling them as the content of their learning? Now that we've taken a look at our pedagogy of all the different ways we can do things, it's really important that we go back to the basics and start with our curriculum. Curriculum is the core of what we do, and you have to rip apart your curriculum. When you start building a new puzzle, it doesn't come out of the box altogether. Our curriculum does, but you know what? Unless you rip it apart and start from there, you can't build it back to be able to see and get a good vision of your whole curriculum and where you're headed. So take those puzzle pieces, sort them, group them, chunk them, put them together in outcomes that make sense. Some curriculums are more linear than others. Some curriculums kind of jump around. It's up to you to figure out where those connections are. In the same way that when you put a puzzle together, a lot of people will pull all the edges out first and build the edge of the puzzle so they have that frame. But once you've done the frame, if that's the way you build a puzzle, do you just randomly start trying to place pieces? No, we sort the pieces. We maybe go by size, depending on the puzzle you're building. Maybe we sort by color. If you're building a scene that's got a house in it, and mountains in the background, and sky, and a nice green part at the front of the picture, you're probably going to group the greens and the grasses together, the mountains, the obvious mountain puzzle pieces together, the house. And so you need to do the same with your curriculum. Chunk it all back together. Figure out what you're actually teaching the students. And so a lot of that comes from looking at the outcomes and then creating learning statements to go with it. And in here, I've put a link to Explicit Direct Instruction. It's a book that you can get that teaches you how to take those outcomes and turn outcomes into explicit instruction to be sure that you are teaching what your students need and not just floating over the curriculum. Now, once you've figured out the chunks, once you've got the parts of the house, the parts of the mountain, the parts of the grass, the parts of the sky, once you've got those chunks, make those your topics. Here's a great start and a great example of how you can take those general and specific learner outcomes of your curriculum and turn them into learning objectives. In this example, thanks to April Brown, who is very, very conscious of what she teaches her students and how that links back to the classroom, we have an example of the specific outcome in a grade 2 curriculum for investigating the physical geography of the different communities in Canada, as explained in the curriculum. And she has taken great care in breaking these down into what are the learning objectives, what are the learning statements that her students need to learn coming from the curriculum. For now, I want you to just think about how you can take your specific outcomes and turn them into learning objectives or learning statements for your students. So at this point in the process, let's hop into your classroom and let's make sure that, first of all, you've created a classroom, chosen your theme, set all your options, invited your students if that's how you do it, or you'll wait till day one for them to join with your classroom code. And now let's take a look at our topic headings. So this we want to match our chunks or our themes that we've found in our curriculum. Now, depending on the age of your students, you may or may not want to have some additional areas. So for example, materials, you might want a materials section for those things that cover all topics, all themes. You might want to have a parent section for the parent documents for younger students so that the parents can go there and find what they need. But basically at this point, we want to make sure we have those basic topic headings as well as the ones that match our curriculum. Once you've done that and you've got those basic chunks set up in your Google Classroom, you need to take a look at the assessment that you plan on doing for your unit. When we look at assessment, the big two are summative and formative. Now, this Venn diagram from OK to Ask, which is a online PD website, is a great Venn diagram showing the difference between formative and summative, as well as the overlap that can happen within the two. Basically, formative and summative are the core of the assessment that we do. And you need to decide, based on the curriculum you're teaching, what types of formative assessment are you going to have to do to assure that your students are learning along the way. The top left speech bubble gives you just some examples of some of the types of tools that you can use for formative assessment. Over on the far right, you'll notice that it's summative assessment examples of tools, and a couple examples below each of those of what types of activities would fit into that category. If you want to look more into assessment, I suggest you do a little bit of research, and in that research, make sure that you are clearly looking at how that applies to your day-to-day teaching based on your pedagogy choices and your curriculum outcomes. Assessing can be difficult, but once you understand the difference between formative and summative, how to create some of those assessments to work with your curriculum outcomes and your learning statements, then you need to look at the quantity of and how you assess those things. So to assess effectively, You need to make sure that you're doing formative assessment basically until a skill has been learned, and then you can move on to summative types of assessments. Maybe it's just part of the outcome, or maybe it's the whole outcome, but you need to teach along the way. And the best analogy I can give you for this is this example of these figure skaters. Their coach did not show them someone else doing this lift and say, go for it. Their coach also didn't just take one part of the outcome, one part of the lift, and say, here's what you need to do. Now do it. Basically, their coach took all of the parts, broke those parts down, taught them each of the parts they needed to know in order to make this lift happen, and then in a somewhat summative format, help them pull it together in a safe practice. Now, once they had all the parts and they were safely practicing it, their knowledge and their skill will take them further to the point where they actually can do this lift successfully. Now, they're not probably going to be successful the first time they try this lift. They're going to have to try this list multiple times. So, formative and summative can become somewhat of a big cycle. But unless you do it properly and you break it down, you're going to find that you'll never get to the point of being able to do this lift. Your students won't get there if you don't break down your curriculum properly and you don't create formative and summative assessments that work well for your students. Make sure your feedback is very timely and frequent. The coach of these kids did not tell them how well or how poor they did 4 days later. They told them immediately. Nice, easy, verbal. If it's something you're doing with your students that's in Google Classroom, use voice, use written, use annotations, but do those things along the way. Don't wait and teach the whole concept until you get to the very, very end to give them any type of assessment, because you're not giving them the opportunity to be successful and to learn along the way so that they will be successful at the end. Let's take a look next at this example again from April Brown, a great friend of mine, who created this bodies of water activity for her students. This activity, as we go through it, is showing us and working on all of the skills that the students need to complete this activity. So she's working with vocabulary that they need to know. She's asking them questions along the way, providing them visuals to help them. She's talking about the different concepts that they need to create and making activities, and this was all done in Google Slides, that the students can either do as a group, as a whole in the initial stages, and that she can release these types of activities out to the students as they progress through their learning. And so as she continues through the lesson, she is able to have the students maybe use whiteboards or discuss with their elbow buddies, and possibly in the future, this then becomes a part of the test. So lots of scaffolding working here, more imagery of what this looks like. Along the way, some checks for understanding. Now moving into from oceans to bays, looking at pictures, maps, words, vocab, building all of the things that are needed in order to allow the students to learn the content. And this is using explicit instruction on what they need to know. Grade 2s, understanding where these lakes are, moving from oceans down to bays, down to lakes. Providing another way of visualizing from space. We have these tools. We have Google Earth. We can do these things today. Take your kids to what you're learning about. Take them on the trip. Now, there's more to that slide deck, but I just wanted to show you how explicit and how assessment is built right in to the Google slide deck of this activity. So now let's move this into Google Classroom, literally into Google Classroom. So sometimes maybe you don't use the marking features of Google Classroom, but you can use them just for your own benefit, for tracking purposes. So once you've got an activity that the students have done in Google Classroom, rather than putting your marks in here and repeating that process into your student information system, for example, PowerSchool, you can actually just use this in a nice quick way with grading with 0 and 1. So 0 means you haven't received it yet, or you haven't reviewed it yet. 1 means you've marked it and the grade is in PowerSchool. It's a great way for you to know what you've done and what you haven't done. Another example, and both of these come from Kelly Fitzgerald, and on all of the slides from her, I've linked to her slideshow to show you other ideas that she provided. I just pulled some out. So use audio files. I talked about this already. You can use audio files not only for students to help them to be able to listen to and process information, whether it be instructions or information that you would have normally told the whole class, but also when it comes to feedback, you can use tools to provide that feedback. So right in Google Slides, if that's what you're using, there's now an insert audio. You also can use Vukaroo. Vukaroo is a very simple tool that requires no login and makes your life and your students' lives nice and easy. All they do is press record, allow their mic, it starts recording them. They can say what they want, explain their thinking. You can explain your thinking, give them feedback. When you're done, you just press stop recording. You can listen to yourself again, re-record if you don't like it, or the best part, save and share. So when you go save and share, you can share it to a multitude of resources, or just grab that link and put that link right into their assignment and let the students listen to your feedback. You can download it if you want to download the file. Pop the MP3 into your Google Drive and then link it to the assignment. That's your choice, but provide assessment, provide feedback in different ways than you might have done before. Next, we're going to look at how students today learn. Students today are not us. Students today, those that have been born since 2010, are what's called the Alpha generation, nicknamed Generation Glass because they spend so much time in front of glass. Now, this generation has a lot of differences to our generations that are the current teachers right now. And some of the big ones that apply to technology in the classroom are the fact that these students are global. They may not understand where everything is in the world, but they have more world knowledge than we had. They have more world connections than we had. They're much more digital. That is part of their life. That is all they know. There's never been a time since they were born where there wasn't iPhones and iPads and tablets and Chromebooks, and it's just a part of who they are. They're much more into social media than we are. They're much more mobile than we are with their knowledge, and they're much more visual than we are. We may think we're visual, we're nothing like them. And I've given you a couple links to some information about the Alpha generation. Have a very different view than we naturally have because of who they are and how digital they are naturally. And yes, They don't necessarily know how to use technology for learning, but that's our job. They know how to use technology for fun. They know how to use it on a practical day-to-day basis. We don't do that. That's not natural for us, but we need to make it natural in our teaching so that we're teaching the way they're learning. This is an example of one of the articles that I have linked to there for you. If you click on the words Google, Snapchat, and Mars, it'll take you to this article. And what I wanted to point out here is how different that this group is. Google understands these guys. A diverse millennial father and a Generation Alpha daughter are reading about blue whales. While the father is reading the book, his daughter interrupts with questions. He turns to the Google Home for the answers. That's not the way that we did things. When someone read me a book on blue whales or whatever it may be, if we had questions, we might have asked them. I might have asked those questions to my parents. What would my parents have done? We would have run to the encyclopedia. We would have pulled out W for whale and we would have looked it up. Maybe they didn't have a section on blue whales. Maybe the question never ever got answered. But the kids of today, they have those answers at their hands. They don't need to memorize the maximum length of a blue whale, because in as much as it takes as to say, how long is a blue whale? They have the answer. We need to take their thinking and show them how to use that ability to learn, to make themselves better. Same with Snapchat. The way they use that, we'd never use it. And Snapchat knows that. Snapchat's making their tools and the parts of the program work for the kids of today. And Mars, as in Mars brand chocolate bars, they're doing the same. They know how these kids think. They know how these kids work, and they're working with that. We need to do that in our classrooms. The guy who came up with Generation Alpha knows that they are the most technology supplied generation ever. They're going to be globally the wealthiest. How many 5-year-olds have you heard of already that are YouTube stars? Yes, that's their millennial parents helping them be that. But there's some of them are pulling in $150,000, $200,000 a month in YouTube money. They don't need to work. That is their job, and they're 5. When will I ever pull in $200,000 a month? Never. It's not the way we are. But we need to change the way we are to be the best for our students. So how do we do that? Well, the content is going to likely be the same. You're still learning about blue whales. But guess what? Your delivery needs to be different. Your delivery needs to allow them to explore in the way that they need to use their voice instead of typing. Yeah, you still need to type. Do you need to touch type? Probably not.
Because you're going to use voice to text. They're going to use voice to text.
More than we ever do, and I use it quite a bit. They're going to look to YouTube to learn things. They're not going to an encyclopedia. And they want their answers now. So please don't just digitize what you're already doing. Change what you're doing. Make it so it meets their needs. One of the books that I've found very, very useful is this Google Infused classroom. And I've given you the link to it here in Amazon as well. And what I like about this book is it does take a look at who kids are today. It does take a look at what is different for them. They need meaning and purpose. Think back to a lot of the work you did in school. You might say to yourself, well, that worked for me. But you know what? You aren't them. They need meaning. They need purpose. They need video. They need pictures. They need things in small chunks of information. That's who they are. And this book helps you understand this. And it helps you take a look at how you can apply that to your Google tools. A couple more ideas here from Kelly Fitzgerald. So give students choice. You know what? Not everybody needs to do the worksheet. Not everybody needs to make a poster. Give them the choice so that they can meet their needs. You can do that in Google Classroom, and here's how. Here's how to create those choices and offer those choices to the student. Does it matter how they get you their knowledge? No, give them choice in that. Differentiate for students. This is super easy to do in Google Classroom. Not only does Google Classroom give you the choice to have different assignments for different students, or as in the previous slide, give options for how to get to the end, but things like hyperdocs. It's a doc. It's how you create it, or a Google site that makes it what our students of today need. And this book is another book that for me changed the way I think about teaching and changed the way I think about what our students of today need. These three women that created this book have created a website to go along with it. And their website walks you through what is a hyperdoc. How do you create it? They have courses, free courses, paid courses on how to do this so that you are pulling that learning together in styles that work with our students of today. It's free to sign up for an account at hyperdocs.co. And these ladies, they believe in sharing. They believe in teaching us how to do better for our students, and they believe in teachers giving to teachers. So join for free. Upload a lesson you've created. Look for your outcomes. Look for your learning goals with your students and find activities that work for them. Tweak the activities. Once you download the activity from here, it's yours to customize further. You don't need to start from scratch. Don't feel that everything I've said in this video so far means you have to totally change what you're doing. Tweak what you're doing, change little things, but always remember who your students are, how they learn. Take it back to your curriculum, and you will be building better for your students. Now that we've looked at how your students learn today in curriculum and pedagogy and assessment, let's look at making their learning active. How do we do that? Well, let's look at our content. How can we change our content? We can give choice. We can give choice in activities. We give choice in different types of assessments that we use. And maybe we don't give the choice when it comes to the assessments, but we're choosing different types of assessments. Look at those big skill concepts, those skills within those outcomes, the verbs that you need to actually teach, and decide exactly what has to be taught. This goes back to the stuff that I shared earlier from April. Explicit instruction. Those learner outcomes, those learning objectives, those learning statements. Go back to them. Create some balance and some variety for your students. Make sure you look at innovative new ways to try things. You don't need to recreate the assignment. Recreate the way you do it. Recreate it in a more active and engaging way. The content's still there. You're still going to get to it, but do it in a different way. Here's another example from April on how she engages her students in her classroom using Google Slides. So this is a reading activity, and this activity is going to take the students through some reading activities as well as some writing activities. So again, vocabulary. Building vocabulary with students so that no matter what book they're looking at, they know the words. These are not grade 2 words, but if you teach them, if you explicitly teach these vocabulary words, when they're reading the book, They understand them. Look at what's in there. Notice there's words, there's sounds, there's pictures, there's everything that the students need to know. These grade twos use these words now that they know them. Talk about it, learn about it. Because now, once they read the book, those words are in it. Are they going to understand the book better? Absolutely they are. And this is a level 1. Is not easy, but guess what? You can take it deeper. So they discuss it. They talk about things from the book. Let's build that understanding. It's not your job just to teach them to read. It's your job to teach them to read and understand, because all of that is going to take them further in life. Things to discuss as a class, writing activities, unjumble the sentence. The parts of the sentence are here. How can they put them together? The next day, review the vocabulary. We've talked about it already. Review it. Let's change the activity. Could this be done online? Yes. Is this being done in a classroom right now? Yes. It works no matter what. Read the book again. Are they going to get more out of it day 2? Absolutely. There's those words again. Now this time, day 2, we're looking at subject and verb. So we're taking the same book and we're using it in a multitude of ways so that we learn about sentence structure, we learn about vocabulary, we're learning about the actual animals, we are learning everything we need to learn. The kids are engaged, the kids know what they're doing. We're building knowledge and giving them confidence in what they're doing. So how do I pull this into Google Classroom? Well, if you look at the slide deck that we just went through part of, April's created that based on all of her resources. So she's taken the reading. She didn't put the book in there. The book is still in front of her with the students, but she's taken the parts that she needs. She's taken those chunks together, and she could easily put this all into Google Classroom. She can have those activities for the students, the links to a video if needed. She can have her own teacher notes in there. Everything is here for her. And when you take all of the materials that you've gathered for your learning outcomes, for your students, all the ideas that you've created, you've chunked them together with your curriculum and you've figured out what you're teaching at what point in time, what you're assessing at what point in time. You can pull all of these things together. And when you pull all of that right into your Google Classroom, you're going to take and create those activities. An activity doesn't have to have just one worksheet attached to it or one activity. An activity in Google Classroom, you can either break it down or pull it together with multiple chunks. That depends, again, on your students, how they learn and how you're going to set it up for success for them. But at this point in time, everything, every assignment you create, every quiz you create, everything you do in Google Classroom, leave it in draft format, because that's allowing you at this point to not only control what the students see, because it hasn't been published yet, but also to be able to modify things and tweak things as you continue to go through and gather your activities. Here's just a little kind of crossword, but already completed for you, just to show you some of the tools besides Google that you can use in order to make this happen for your students. And as we look at these tools, though, I want you to remember that who your students are is going to affect which of these tools will work for them. Not only work for them, but that they're allowed to use. One thing that's become very prominent in Alberta in the last couple of years, probably 5 years, it's becoming more popular, last 3 for sure, is the safety of our students. and the software we're using. Can't any longer just go on the internet and grab anything out there to use with our students. We need to make sure that we're using tools that keep our students safe and that are appropriate for their learning level. Now, as part of that, you'll notice in the top right corner that I have linked the Peace approved sites list. This list is basically the works of Peace School Division in the last 5 years on student safety and looking at the security of different tools. So anything with the little maple leaf behind it is a Canadian product, sorted by what they can be used for, assessment and review. These are all tools that do assessment and review. Do you need to use every one of them? Absolutely not. Use the ones that work for your students. This page, this tab, is sorted by category. If you're just looking for a specific tool that you've seen or heard of, you can go down to the bottom and click on Approved. And now you have an alphabetical list of them and you can find the one you want. Take a peek at what it does, what's it's used for in the classroom. What are the ages of the students that can use it? A lot of websites nowadays have rules around what age levels can use their products. You need to make sure you're following that. And some of them have specific requirements as well. If students are under 13, they need signed parent permission. If students are under 13, parents need to be notified. If students are under 18, they need parent signature. Be sure that you're using those and checking those, because it is becoming so overwhelming with everything that's out there in our world today that we just want to kind of take the best of the tools and the safest of the tools that meet the needs we want and use those. Teaching our students 25 different tools isn't necessarily best. If 6 or 4 of those tools can do the job of everything, but make sure they're the right tools for the job. Lastly, in this category is another way in Google Classroom to manage your content. So you've got your topic headings, you've got your assignments or your activities underneath it. Maybe it would help your students if those activities were actually numbered. That's up to you. That's up to your needs of your students. But it might help you or your students. So just another activity, this one from Alice Keeler. So I'm sharing these additional activities with you because not only do I want to try and show you how easy it is to change what you're doing for the betterment of your students, but I want to make sure that I'm giving you as many different ideas on how to do that as I possibly can. This activity is looking at reading assignments. Students need to be reading, and they need to be reading a lot. And the website Newsella is a good website. Make sure, again, you check who can use it and who can't. But this is a good website in the fact that it allows you to pull up the same article at different reading levels to meet the individual needs of your students. And you can put that into Google Classroom by taking those links and attaching those links based on who's going to do that assignment. Newsella lets you log in with Google or Microsoft, Clever, or just a username and password that you choose so that it's not linked to any of those types of accounts. Once you're logged into Newsella, you'll find that there's latest content. This is current news. This is stuff the students know about, they're hearing about on TV. Let's use that in our reading and teach them how to do it properly. Featured articles, great anything, even Spanish, if you've got Spanish-speaking students. This is an American site. There is a Canadian section to it, so once you've created your account and signed in, you can go to the Canadian news stories as well. And when you take a news story, you can click on the different levels and get activities and the story itself at different levels. And that's a great way to teach reading to your students, but meet the needs of all of them. Use the question feature. So create a Google question in Google Classroom. Use it as maybe an exit slip. And depending on what your students answer, if you sort by answer and using the example on the screen, you now have some great groupings, some great information on where to go from here. This is wonderful, formative, easy assessment that runs through your Google Classroom. Get the students to share images of their work, no matter what the subject. It doesn't just need to be art class. Anything where they can take a picture using a device, using their Chromebook, and post that allows you to have images of their work that you can look at, that they can provide to you so you can provide feedback to them. Maybe it's sharing with the class. All great ways to use Google Classroom. Depending on the age of your students, how about some collaborative note-taking? Do they all need to take those notes, or can they work together in one Google Doc? Can they build those notes as the unit or the lesson or the outcomes proceed? Absolutely. As long as you take the time to teach them. When you're all writing in one document, you have to be more conscious of where you're writing and what you're writing. I've seen many adult sessions, many teacher sessions where they do collaborative note-taking, and the power of collaborative note-taking is amazing, because what one student heard, what one teacher in that session heard, another teacher might have heard something differently, took it a different way. And if they each take their notes and things are organized, you can have some really powerful notes that everyone then can use for review, for assessment. And everyone's learned by building together. How about video reflections? A great way for students to tell you their thinking. Because while they're videotaping themselves and talking through their thinking, they are now not only kind of self-assessing, but they are learning deeper by having to explain it. So let's pull this all together. Based on everything that I've talked about in this presentation, I created this little circle of activities. So starting at the green star, select your outcome. Select a chunk of outcomes that all work together. Take those outcomes and move over and create some explicit learning statements that are going to go with those outcomes. Because once you know exactly what you need to teach, it'll be way easier to move to the next step where you're actually creating engaging and appropriate activities using appropriate tools. Once you've created those activities using those tools, make sure that you reflect back on how your students learn. Does this meet their learning needs? Do you have variety? You don't want to use Flipgrid every day. You don't want to use Edpuzzle every day. That's not going to excite your students. Are your activities engaging? Make sure it's engaging. Place those activities then, once you've got them all figured out, in your Google Classroom, in draft format, so that you can then publish or schedule those activities when you're ready for them. And up until that point, you can tweak them. And maybe in some of the older classes, or for example, high school CTS modules, you don't have that opportunity maybe to leave everything in draft format until the day you need it. Maybe you need to have your whole course available all the time. That's okay too. Because if you do need to tweak, most things in Google Classroom can be tweaked. But leaving things in draft format is kind of just a basic concept that I go with, because until you need it, there's no use putting it out there for the students. I want to end our time together today by looking at a few amazing resources. So I've already shared a couple with you as we proceeded through this presentation, but I want to show you a few other ones to take with you to help you as you continue to grow on this path to be the best that you can be for your students. So this first one is called Do More with Google Classroom. Matt Miller is amazing. He's got a number of books out there and he's wonderful. I don't personally have a hand version of this. I've been buying a lot of my books lately on my Kindle, and I can read them on my Kindle, on my MacBook Air. I can read them on my iMac. I can read them on my iPad, and I've started liking this option because it allows me to, still use my little highlighter and my pen, but it allows me to take the book with me everywhere. I tend to take a lot of books with me when I travel around to our schools and I do presentations, and my bag can get pretty heavy with books. So I've started doing a lot on Kindle. So this one, I've given you the link through Amazon. You can do Kindle or good old hard copy, whatever works best for you. But this is a wonderful one that kind of goes with everything I've been saying today on how to take Google Classroom that extra step further. The next one is Google Classroom, Control-Alt-Achieve. It's actually not Google Classroom. It's more about how to use the Google tools in a different way than you may have been using those tools. I've given you a part of the table of contents here, just so you can see that what they're doing and what Eric does here is he takes a look at, for example, in the section 1, rebooting Google Docs. So rather than just retype your story, your good copy, and print it out, how can I take Google Docs and take them that next step to creating something more engaging and active for my students? One of my favorites as a teacher of K-3, or as a lover of teaching those grades — I have taught many other grades, some not as lovely as my K-3s. But for littles, this was really eye-opening for me. I knew kids could do things with tech because I've done stuff with little guys with tech. But to actually have someone voice this and put it into print, that students, these little guys, they can do anything. And her chapter 3 is literally about how to use Google Classroom with these little guys. Great book. These two books I have currently lent out, so I can't show them physical copy to you. Again, links are here. Alice Keeler and Libby Miller have done two, I believe, two now, maybe a third, in this 50 Things series. And in here, basically, they're looking at, again, ways to take your Google Classroom use further. The Google Classroom 101 Ideas on How to Effectively Use It. This was done in 2019, pretty current. Not quite pandemic current, but pretty current. And this one has a lot of good ideas in it as well. The last two, of which one I own the physical copy and one I own the Kindle copy, is Casey Bell's books. She is big into being more practical with what we do with students and making the learning for the students more engaging. So a couple more great books for you. I hope you've enjoyed our time together today. I've enjoyed sharing my passion in making us better teachers to meet the needs of our awesome students today. If you have questions, there's multiple ways to contact me on the bottom of this slide. Thank you for your time. Please reach out. I'm here for you. And thank you for this opportunity.